My dear friends, this first day of winter, December 21st, is the moment in our annual cycle when the sun and the earth are farthest apart, when the sun is lowest in the sky, the daylight is briefest, and the night is longest. The Mayans, in case you hadn't heard, even calculated that the world would end today, 12/21/12. Before I get serious, did you hear what David Letterman and Jay Leno said about that? They said, if you're going to end the world, why end it on a Friday? Couldn't they at least have said the world would end on a Monday so we could have the weekend? I mean, why would you end the world before Shabbos? I would only add that Memphis, which is 10 years behind the rest of the country, is the place to be if the world is coming to an end today. If the world is coming to an end today everywhere else, we've still got more time here in Memphis, at least 10 more years. This whole issue of the end of the world and the official beginning of winter calls, I think, for a Jewish understanding of time. And in Judaism, there are basically three divisions of time. There is this world, Olam Hazeh, the universe you and I presently inhabit. The events of the past and present all occur in this world. We live in it, we think in it, and we shall die in it. What follows this world in the order of Jewish time are the Yemot HaMashiach, the days of the Messiah. And at this point, the Bible has two threads of thought, the Jewish Bible, about the coming of the Messianic age. The first concept of the Messiah, which you get from the prophets, I like to call the horizontal view. And in this context, the Messianic age will arrive as the consequence of a progression in human history, a state of affairs that will eventually come about, maybe not in our lifetime, but someday, some way we're inching toward that time, not as the result of any divine intervention, but as a product of human effort and human conduct, tikkun olam. In other words, this view of history is presuming that humanity is purposeful, that people, by their own initiative and determination, will bring about that day when we shall beat our swords into plowshares and our spears into pruning hooks, when nation shall not lift up sword against nation or increase bloodshed with guns anymore. By contrast, the last chapters of the book of Daniel present what I would call the vertical view of Messianism. And there, the Messiah or deliverer is the product not of ordinary history or straight line horizontal development, but of a direct intervention. God bursts onto the stage of human history, sends someone who announces a plan to redeem a world which we have mismanaged and betrayed. Now, depending on how bad times were, Judaism fluctuated between the horizontal view and the vertical view. Christianity emphasized the vertical. And the one who really started Christianity, Paul, believed that he was actually living in the days of the Messianic age. The third and final division of time in rabbinic thought, the sequel to the Messianic age, is the afterlife, called the Olam Haba, the world to come. And this reality is not of this world. It's not about human time. We're subject to God's time. Eternity, this is the occasion for the resurrection of the dead, when all that's wrong will be made right. The principle of resurrection comes from this idea in the Jewish Bible. Ezekiel's valley of dry bones, Elijah resurrected the dead. If you read our Bible, Saul conjured up Samuel. It's a very Jewish notion. And it's interesting that this would become later a sweeping doctrine in the faith of Christianity. The prophet Isaiah and his disciples were the creative geniuses of this idea of Jewish time and the Messianic age. I'm not making this up. If you read the Bible, there was an Assyrian army, Sennacherib, and his people were about to overtake Jerusalem. King David's descendant, Hezekiah, they were ready to end our people. And Sennacherib's army suddenly got an outbreak of what archaeologists suggest was a case of herpes or some rash epidemic, which blunted the offense and led to Hezekiah. And you can now, when you go to Israel, walk through that tunnel. And that made believers out of us. It vindicated our faith in God and in the Mashiach, the Messiah, the anointed one of David. And it reaffirmed our covenant in God. And subsequent crises in Jewish history, where the survival of our people was threatened, reinforced this idea, this hope, that God would never forsake us and would deliver us miraculously, just as God had done in the days of Hezekiah. And when Judaism became one historical crisis after another, when our people no longer had the land of Israel, when there was a constant threat to our survival as an ethnic group and religious group, this messianic hope became a guiding principle of Jewish life and thought. And after Hezekiah, 687 BCE, if you study history, as I know many of you have, our people lived through some harrowing historical experiences. We were exiled by the Babylonians. We lived in subjugation in our own land under the Persians, the Greeks, the Syrians, the Egyptians, the Romans. Only for a short time, relatively, did we Jews control our own country and our own lives. And guess when this was? Under the Maccabees, who, believe it or not, were not even from the lineage of David. And even that period was marked by, like we're seeing in Congress, internal political persecution and hardship. So throughout Jewish history, and I'm giving it to you in 2 minutes, I teach an entire course on this at Memphis Theological Seminary. But throughout those centuries, our people longed for the fulfillment of God's promise to send a liberator, a Messiah, to bring about this messianic age, to free us from the tyranny of foreign and native oppressors. Just one more note before we move on. Roman rule over Palestine was the most bitter of all. We look for the Messiah to defeat the Romans on the battlefield. I mean, just imagine if you were a Jew and getting clobbered by the Romans. And a number of personalities came on the scene who embodied that Jewish messianic hope. And these included Jesus of Nazareth, whom the Romans crucified and mocked, what did it say on his cross? As King of the Jews. But there was another one 90 years later named Shimon Bar Kokhba, who with his military might almost drove the Romans out of the country. But in the end, he too failed. He was so great that in the Talmud, the greatest rabbi, Rabbi Akiva, believed that this guy was the Messiah. But when the Romans crushed him too, it was a collective letdown, because the proof of the pudding was peace and harmony for all humanity. And so we're still waiting for the Messianic age. I cut out 2 pages of my sermon tonight since it's an early service. I could tell you about Shabbatai Tzvi in 1666. Half the Jewish world believed that this guy may be the one, because in 1648, 250,000 Jews were massacred. And so they believed, God, please send someone. And he was this charismatic figure whom many followed. Obviously, it's not about the person, It's about this time of tranquility, of universal peace, of love. We're still waiting and working for that time. And so let me share with you a story before I close. You may have heard it. I apologize in advance if you have. It's about Sam Krelstein, like Joe Jew, crossing the street when all of a sudden he's hit by a car. And people gather around Sam. Somebody calls 911. And as soon as the ambulance arrives, a young paramedic rushes over to examine him. So he's examining Sam, and he folds a coat and places it beneath his head, and he asks him, Mr. Krelstein, are you comfortable? And with just a little shrug of his shoulders, this little Jewish guy, Krelstein, looks up and says, comfortable? What can I tell you? I make a living. In Krelstein's mind, the question couldn't be about his physical condition. It was inconceivable to him that anybody could assume he was comfortable after being hit by a car. Reality simply did not admit such a possibility. So we laugh at his answer because Krelstein is far more attuned to the situation than the paramedic is. He faces the world as it is, makes a joke, but still, as a Jew, has a vision of how it might be, even though it's not as how he would like it to be. Judaism teaches us to live in time, within the limits of the world as we know it, and the one God who actually created it, not the one you and I hope for that's unrealistic, or even the world to come, which we do believe in. But heaven is fine. Earth is where all the problems are. Perhaps Judaism's greatest distinction, in closing, is its emphasis on the world of reality and the way it empowers us to live with this double vision. That, I think, is the most enduring message of the word that we all shouted when Jack raised the Kiddush cup. We said l'chaim, to life. And I think that's why our most sacred hymn may be Hatikva, which means the hope. L'chaim points us to a path of gratitude we enjoy, however imperfect our bodies and this world may be. And Hatikva teaches us repeatedly that despite our misfortunes and tribulations, God has never abandoned us individually or collectively, and never will. Life on earth may be no paradise, but it is still the place where we make Shabbat, where we join with God to make the world better by what we do in whatever days we have in this world before we go to the next one. So for the Mayans, today marks the end of the world. For Jews, today marks the beginning of a better tomorrow, depending on what we do with our time in the Olam Hazeh, our time here on earth. May this Shabbat and every Shabbat remind you and me of that messianic vision of a better tomorrow, no matter what the past or present has wrought. And let us say, Amen.